So today is Restorative Justice Day 2018, and my expectations for today's is to build a awareness of what restorative practices is and what it looks like in our community. So in our schools, in our court systems, and in just individual lives. And so just really giving people an awareness of what it is, and then some practical tools to walk away with and how to start implementing restorative practices in their own lives.
Good. We have several people still parking, but we want to honor time because there are a lot of very exciting things happening today. So I want to start off on our mornings on a good note. And in order for me to do that and to bring my best self here to you today, I first need to thank God, who has given me the ability and the desire to really love people and connect people and strengthen relationships, because we are stronger and better together. And so restorative practices, relationships are essential to building strong communities. And we're going to talk about how we are going to build and impact strong communities all day today. And so that's what I need to be my best self, because nobody wants to see my second best self. That's a scary thought. I really reserve that for my husband. But so you're going to be very thankful that I thank God today. And so the next thing we're going to really do and bring to this space is your best self. And so we're going to take just a few minutes today to just settle ourselves into our seats. And I just want everybody to either close your eyes or just find a space or something to look at. And I just want everybody to really get to be present in this moment right here today. Freeing your mind, taking that from your head down to your neck, to your shoulders, feeling where the tension is in your body, if it's in your back, if it's in your jaw, if it's in your shoulders or your knees or feet, and just releasing that tension right now. And let's get ready to rock and roll. I am on a time limit, so I have to write out everything that I say today. My name is Dina Thompson. I teach restorative practices here at the University at Buffalo in the School of Social Work. Any social work students in here today? Let me hear you holler. Woo-hoo! Oh, any social work students in the building today? Let me hear you holler. Woo-hoo! Great, thank you. So this right here, Restorative Justice Day was really birthed out of a student's paper. And so they did the paper and they presented that paper, and I said, that's way too good, we have to do that. And so out of that paper came from Carl Reister. 3 years ago, we started Restorative Justice Day. So this is our third Restorative Justice Day. And we're really building this to advocate for building stronger relationships within community. Because if we know we have strong relationships in community, we have the ability and the places and the spaces for people to be their best selves. I'm already getting off track, so I'm going right back to my paper. So on behalf of the University at Buffalo, the School of Social Work, I'd like to welcome you to the third annual Restorative Justice Day. Thank you for coming. I realize that you could be anywhere and you chose to be here for 8 hours. And I know, as a college student, sometimes you choose to come here because it's free food. And if that's what brought you here, I'm happy that you are here today. Woohoo, I know. So today we are going to experience so many things. Today we will experience the indigenous and African expressions of restorative practices and hear from people from our own communities how these practices are changing schools, communities, and our judicial system. We together here, we will hear from our local youth today and how restorative practices are impacting our youth. We're going to hear from our judicial system today and how restorative practices is impacting and changing our judicial system. And we'll cover a bit about what it looks like in our public schools today. I have to thank a few people. How am I on time? I gotta look at my timer. Okay. So I just need to thank some people today. I cannot even begin this day without thanking Kalina. Where's Kalina at? Kalina Piles, who's probably out working, and Brandy Loveland, who is actually running a program for us at a Buffalo Public School this morning and is not here, but will be here this afternoon. So I have to thank them today, and I also need to thank all of our sponsors. I can't do it individually because I don't have time, so please look at the back of your program and they will tell you who they are. So without further ado, I would like to first and foremost welcome Pete Hill. Pete Hill is an enrolled member of the Cayuga Nation, the Huron Clan, and is currently the All Relations Project Director at the Native American Community Service of Erie and Niagara Counties. Pete has worked at NACS for over 25 years, spending the majority of the time with several youth and community programs addressing alcohol, substance abuse, and prevention, suicide prevention, crisis intervention, teen pregnancy, wow, you are busy, prevention, and HIV risk reduction. Pete has integrated many Native American culture teachings and approaches into programs, design, evaluations, and strength-based approach, and has also been involved in the department of new approaches and initiatives to help the community to move beyond the impact of historical traumas related to factors that negatively impact the intergenerational health and vitality of Native American people and general communities. He will help us officially open our day with a traditional acknowledgement and dance.
Good morning, Dina. Good morning, folks. All right, nice to see all of you. It's all right. Good to see some friendly faces here. And Dina, thank you so much for the invitation and opportunity to open up the conversation today on restorative justice. I am Pete Hill. I work at Native American Community Services, member of the Cayuga Nation Huron Clan. The program that we have is All Our Relations, funded by the Kellogg Foundation. It's just recognizing how much we have in common with each other, how much we want the same issues, the same needs, the same resources, to have a good life in our families. One of the things that we do in terms of Native American culture, especially for the Haudenosaunee or the Six Nations people, is that we usually open up with our Thanksgiving address. And what this is, I'm not going to do it today because there's other things we'd have to do with it. But just to share what it is a little bit, it's a reminder of how much we all have to be thankful for. The teaching that I've always heard is that everything that we need to, as human beings, to have a good life in this world is all around us. If we have a good relationship with and understanding and respect with ourselves, with each other, and all the elements of the natural world. So with all the people, we recognize, we give thanks for all the people who are here. We give thanks for just the ability to wake up in the morning. When we woke up this morning, how many of us really acknowledge that the Creator gave each and every one of you another day to be on this world? People leave us all throughout the lifespan as little babies, throughout our years on this world, and we never know how long we're going to have. So just have the opportunity to have another day here is a really sacred time. That mindfulness that Dina walked us through in terms of being grounded, this is also what our Thanksgiving address does. It grounds us with that feeling of abundance, of gratitude, and appreciation of not taking anyone or anything for granted. We give thanks for our Mother Earth. We give thanks for all the elements of the natural world, from the waters, from the rocks, the trees, all the winds, the stars, the sun, the moon, all our helpers who have helped us along the way, and a lot of different things, pretty much everything in creation. Again, the whole idea is that we don't take anything for granted. Everything has a contribution, has a life spirit to itself, and has things that they offer to all of us. And that's part of our responsibility to recognize that as human beings, our health is totally dependent on the health of the natural world. Right now, we see a lot of countries that are being very threatened because they're running out of good drinking water. And we see all the developments, we see the water protests, the water protectors at Standing Rock and all the other places that are going on. That's for all the humanity. That's for all of us. It isn't just for Native people, it's for everybody. So our Thanksgiving address traces back actually to our creation story. And there's a lot of information we can share on that. I don't have time about that. But the one thing with our creation story, first life in this world was a woman, Sky Woman, who came in this world. There's a lot I could talk about, but again, we don't have time. But one of the things that's really important that relates to restorative justice is recognizing that there was a Sky Woman who had her daughter had twins, And one of them was, they call a good twin, and one was a mischievous twin. The whole idea is that the good twin would create the rose, and the mischievous twin would put thorns on that rose. The whole idea with that teaching, and there's a lot more, I'm really not giving a very good job of summarizing what the creation story and what this part is about. But the whole idea is that all of us have the ability to be on that good side of helping other people, and we all have the ability to be on the mischievous side, to do things that might hurt ourselves or other people, and just do things that aren't very good for a lot of folks. But we all have that potential, and part of our culture is finding that balance between the good and the mischievous side for ourselves, and how to be respectful, because even with the day and night, that's part of our creation story, having that balance as well. The reason I say that is when we talk about restorative justice, when we see people who are doing things that hurt themselves or each other, one of the things that a lot of Native communities have done is we don't want to tell that person that they're no good or that they deserve to be in jail, to put them away, or worse, to execute them for things that they've done. One story I've heard about restorative justice in the Native community is if one person killed another person, that person would actually have to move in and be adopted into the other family who they just took away. So there's that punishment against that person who did that, but is to make that right, to restore what that family lost and have the other family, it's a shared loss that everybody feels. So it isn't just a matter of that person is wrong or anything like that, or evil, but it's just that we all have the ability and have that duality that we sometimes struggle with on a daily basis. And that mindfulness that Dina started out with, and how to bring our good selves, that's what we're all talking about. The other thing that we recognize that, especially at Native American Community Services, as Dina was talking about, is the impact of historical trauma. Trauma-informed care, especially for social workers, you might have heard about that, it's a really good development. It's not a really new idea, but we recognize that how people are treated as kids, how they act as young adults and then adults and elders has a big impact. But we also recognize a lot of communities have been through historical trauma. And when we recognize the impact of trauma, and then community-wide and trauma-informed care, they talk about complex trauma, when we realize how much that complicates issues for people coming through, when people are traumatized, and recognizing that good and that mischievous side that we all have, when they're traumatized, sometimes they act out in response to that. And a lot of the reactions make sense. There's a lot of trauma stories I've heard about when I know a person who is doing a lot of different things, and I look through that lens of what happened to them as children, all of that makes sense. Their whole life makes sense to them, to me. So the whole idea is that we want to restore that person to a good sense of who they are. Even in our Great Law of Peace, how we form a confederacy, one person who is known as Tadadaho, before the Great Law of Peace came to us, was the most vicious, wicked warrior, kind of hurtful person, really did a lot of hurtful things to himself and to other people, and he was the most vicious. Yeah, because people saw that he was alive, that the Creator gave him life, that we didn't want to lose anybody to things that we could avoid. And it was the women who really reached him. Tadadaho changed now, instead of being the most wicked warrior, now he's recognized as the chief of all chiefs. It's a title that goes from one generation to the next in our traditional communities. So the whole idea is that persons who may be doing some not good things for themselves or others, we all have that potential, and each one of that person has that potential to make that change. So that's just a few words about why we talk about restorative justice and the grounding in terms of Native culture. We are on the lands of the Haudenosaunee. Right now, we're on the lands of the ancestral lands of the Tuscarora and the Seneca Nations here in Western New York. So we also want to recognize that as well, because this is all Native land, and so it's good to see visitors and friends come here, and it's really more nice to see we're able to share some of our culture with or just the words that we shared today and some of our dances. So we do have a special treat to share with you, and again, thank you for the opportunity to have this. Some of our traditional Haudenosaunee dancers are here to share a few things about our culture, because our dances, when we do our social dances, they're so much fun. We do these a lot, and there's just so much power and strength and unity when you see little kids dancing next to an elder, dancing next to somebody who's 30, dancing holding a newborn baby next to somebody who's 90 years old. It's intergenerational, but men and women, everybody's welcome to join these social dances. So let me introduce from the Tuscarora Nation, Jordan Smith, and he'll introduce his family, and we'll continue with the dances.
So what I'm going to do in a bit of time is talk a bit about restorative practices in schools and share with you two examples of school-community partnerships. Schools cannot do restorative practices by themselves. They have to work within the community. That adage from Africa that it takes a village to raise a child is honestly true, even though it seems to have become a cliche. And then I'll share with some of the challenges that I see in regards to implementing restorative practices throughout the community, having to do with time, persistence, equity, and policy. So, the first thing I just want to review is what we mean when we say restorative practices in schools or restorative education in schools. This comes from an excellent book, the Little Book of Restorative Justice in Education. Clever title, don't you think? It very succinctly goes through the thinking currently about what it means to have restorative justice principles enacted in a school. So let me just quickly illustrate this diagram, which is even more pithy than the book even. And that is at the very center, we start with thinking about what our beliefs are. Do we believe that all people, all children, no matter what they have done, are worthy and relational? Are they worthy because they are human beings of our care and concern and kindness? And do we recognize that all human beings operate in relationship with each other? That's what ensures our survival. And so that we have that as our central belief. And then we have practices. We have repair of harm that helps to transform conflict. But in order for that to work well, we have to have relationship practices in the school, because what you're repairing really are relationships. And if you don't have relationships in the first place, what are you repairing things back to? And then, in order for those two things to work well, you also have to be very conscious that you are trying to create a just and equitable learning environment for everyone. So it's not just about your discipline practices, but can the children see themselves in every aspect of the school, from what you have on the wall to the curriculum that you teach? Yesterday I was in a school and I saw a whole bunch of flags of all different countries, and I was wondering if those were flags of the students who had ancestors from those countries or who had actually come from those countries as immigrants here to the United States. I saw artwork that reflected the children in the school. I went into a classroom and I saw African drums. I went into a classroom and I saw pictures of people who looked like the kids. So a just and equitable environment is not just about the discipline practices, because if the kids don't feel as though they belong in this school, why should they want to be in relationship with other people, and why should they want to repair harm? Oh, and then there are the values of respect, dignity, and mutual concern. Can you give that to everyone, including somebody who just yelled at you, including somebody who has just broken your beakers that you just bought in your science class? So the practices in a school, how do you actualize, what does it actually look like when you go into a school? Well, it starts first and foremost with the mindset of the adults. Because what we think then shows up on our face and in our body, and that is the first thing that people can do in regards to restorative practices. The breathing exercise that Dina took us through at the beginning of the conference, just stop and think what it would be like if every adult was expected to do that and did that, because they knew it was a good thing to do, not just because they were expected to do it, because they knew it was a good thing to do. They did that at the beginning of every class. I like to point out to superintendents, breathing is free. You don't have to write a grant and get a coordinator, put together a team to encourage your staff to teach the kids how to breathe. You don't even have to actually hire somebody to do that, because you've got choir directors and band directors and athletic directors and probably 5 or 6 people who teach yoga on the weekends because you're not paying them enough. So, you can start by breathing. And now, scaling up restorative practices is a multi-year process, and people want to have change right away. And I just suggest to you that it can start with that idea that we're going to work with kids, even if I don't know all of the words to the restorative questions. I am mindful of myself, and I help other kids be mindful of themselves. And I am compassionate because I am working with children. Just because they've done something wrong, well, you know what the heck? That's their developmental task. They're supposed to make mistakes. That's what they're supposed to do. And we are supposed to help them learn from that mistake and not punish them. Okay, I'm just going to calm down here. The next step is empathetic listening and speaking. It's not just about speaking in I statements, which teaches kids and role models for them empathy, but it is also about showing that in order for people to speak, you also have to have someone who listens. So we have to role model that. We have to listen to children if we're expecting them to listen to us. And we need to listen without interruption. That's what empathetic listening looks like. It's really simple. Don't interrupt until the child is done. Don't interrupt until your adult is done. Restorative conversations with 1 or 2 people, what happened, what we were thinking at the time, what we thought about science, who's been affected in what way, and what we need in order to make things better. Very simple, but profound. So therefore it means that it's not always simple. Circles, to build relationships so that everyone can see everyone else. You know, my tradition when you dance in a row in the front, and there's all these people in the back. This tradition was really lovely because we watched for a while, but then we actually just danced together, which of course is what human beings have always wanted to do. We need to stop making performances out of the natural things that human beings do and expect everyone to do it, whether you're Beyonce or not. I just want you to know I also on inside am Aretha Franklin. Always wanted to be a diva. Okay, so repairing harm can be done with circle as well. It's just a big communication process in its simplest form, but it also has really profound meaning. really profound meaning, and we need to be respectful of the people who gave us the meaning of restorative practices and restorative justice, because it didn't just come from criminology and sociology, but it has been for centuries part of indigenous people's experiences and the way in which they operate within the world. And so I want to express again my respect and thankfulness for having learned these processes from the the indigenous people of Minnesota, the Ojibwe and the Dakota, as well as the Tlingit people up in the Yukon, who taught me what I know about that process, along with some other people as well. And then conferencing to repair harm as well. So we're building relationships with people, and we're figuring out how to repair harm in an equitable environment. So in order to make all of those practices happen, we have to be a little more thoughtful than just saying, well, do it. Go to a training and do it. Going to a training and doing it is a step, but in order to actually get people to do it, you're going to have to coach them. You're going to have to give them technical assistance. You're going to have to problem solve with them. You're going to have to say, oh, I'm sorry that one blew up in your face. That happens, you know, that happens. Next time, maybe it'll be a little bit better. So in order to get that together, you start out with exploration, which in the way we talk about the circle process is the first stage, which is about meeting, getting acquainted with restorative practices. Restorative justice is based on the premise that people choose to do it. So you can't mandate this. That's not a good idea. Some people are trying to put that into statute. I don't recommend it. It's a sure way to kill something. People have to choose to do it, but in order to choose to do something, you have to know something about it. So it's certainly perfectly fine in my mind to mandate that staff in a school or in an organization go to overview sessions, learn the circle process through experience, have some videos that they look at, and they read a couple of books about restorative practices. Then they can make the decision as to whether or not this is something that is useful for them. And so that's part of that first exploration part. Then installation is basically training. And in restorative practices, what we mean by training is that you actually do these things. And in doing that, you build trust with your peers. You build trust with your colleagues. So that when you get to the point where you say, okay, now we're going to try it, we're going to implement this, we're going to address issues, people are willing to do it because they trust that the other person is going to do it as well. And then full implementation means that you've got this system down. You've changed your policies if you need to. You know how to train people continuously. And that gives you a sense of unity because you have a plan about how you're going to go forward. And what it means to go forward is that you go back to the beginning. Because you always have to teach children, and there are always new staff in a school, and there are always new families, and that's the nature of education. So you just keep going around and around and around. And that's sort of clever, huh? So, in order to make this happen, don't depend upon one person. Because that person might win the lottery and move to Hawaii. Now, why would anyone leave Buffalo? Well, then they win the lottery, stay in Buffalo, but start their own foundation, you know? And so you've got to have a team in case people have moved, in case they have gone on. And a team in every building is really helpful. And that team needs support. Just as the person you have trained needs support, the team needs support. The support comes from the team in the district office. And that team needs support because every school needs support from their community, and so you have to have a community team. And where do you start with that community team? I suggest that you start with the elders. Because these are indigenous processes, and people from all over the world have experience with this. One of the things that I found really fascinating was that very early in the restorative justice movement in Minnesota, there were Somali people who were engaged in restorative practices. Why? Because they had the same basic practice back in Somalia. They would sit under the tree with the elders, and because they didn't have the resources and they didn't think it was a useful thing anyway to build a prison, whenever something went wrong, they solved the problem within the community. And so lots of people have resonance with that. It doesn't necessarily mean it's confined to one particular group of folks. And so seeking out those folks are very important. Because if you want to implement something, you want to get the word on the street to be positive, and word of mouth is probably the most powerful form of advertising. And if you can get the elders and the leaders in the community to come and talk with you and to be respectfully included in what you're doing, that is really important. And besides, this is a gift that the elders have given to us. Also, we need to include our youth. We can't, nothing about us without us. That's really important, and we need to model that as we can from the beginning. People from faith communities, community leaders that are formal and informal, folks from the systems, because we want to have a system that also treats your kids in a restorative way. Because school is so much cheaper than jail, and its outcomes are so much better. So if a kid has done something really serious, yeah, we need to secure the safety of the community, but we do not need to throw that person away. I want all of the children to go to school, graduate, so that they can get a job and pay taxes, so that I can be taken care of in my age, elderly age, in the manner to which I am accustomed. So this is really all about me. But really, we cannot throw, the amount of money we are throwing away by incarcerating people over a long period of time, just in terms of lost taxes, is amazing. And nobody talks about that. Not to mention the human loss. Unbelievable. Anyway, community organizations, restorative justice and mediation programs, because you need to have people who know how to do this and do this all the time. And people who know both the school systems as well as the criminal justice system as well as the community system. Sometimes the school needs to look for an outside partner, and I'll give you an illustration about that in a bit. So everyone is needed for what they bring. One of the 7 core assumptions in Kay Prentice and Carolyn Boyce-Watson's book, Circle Forward. So let me give you 2 examples of school-related community partnerships. One is in Carleton County. Carleton County is a county just off of Lake Superior, this is the story of how the Carleton County, or the Carleton area alternative education program came to be restored. So it actually started, interestingly enough, on the outside, but it started on the inside in a prison in Carleton County. In Minnesota, I've got to get something. In Minnesota, the Department of Corrections has restorative justice councils that they set up in all of the prisons. And so the prisoners have these councils. And that helped to make their ability to be able to get along with each other so much better. So then people thought, if it's good for the prisoners, for the inmates, it must be good also for the guards and the administrators. So they set up restorative justice, workplace restorative justice programming for all of the people who were working in the prisons, which meant that some of those people also worked on the outside, like probation officers. And so then the probation officers and the courts decided that they would have a circle sentencing program. In Minnesota, we have a statute that says that both adult offenders and juvenile offenders can be diverted to restorative justice programs. And so they wanted to fulfill the requirement of that statute. Then, so you've got a statute, you're doing a restorative justice program. What they had was circle sentencing, where there was a probation officer who was the circle keeper, adult volunteers in the community who were part of the circle, and then the youth would come and be applicants to the circle. And a lot of those kids who were applicants to those circles went to an alternative learning center in the community. And so the probation officer, the principal of the alternative learning center, and the students got together and said, wouldn't it be nice if we would carry the sentencing circle feeling into the school? Yeah, that'd be cool. So the Carleton Area Alternative Education Program became restorative, and it is the ALC of the year. What do they have in that school? So here's a picture of what it is that they do. So they started out of the gate really fast, because they not only had the probation officer who was the technical assistance person, and is now, that's solely what she does because she's retired from probation, the person who helped with implementation. But they also had all these students who were familiar with the circle process and actually could be keepers. So they set up first and foremost a student ambassador program. And the youth were training the adults in the school. Those kids meet daily to increase their ability and their capacity. They have staff self-care circles. Not what's the curriculum, not how you handle them all, but just how are you doing once a month. They have the core team meetings, that is that team idea for implementation. Those people meet monthly to review their strategic plan with their RJ consultant and coach. They have quarterly restorative justice days. So once every quarter, everybody plans something around restorative justice. And so you go into the school and there's the regular classes are dispensed and they do this other work. There are all kinds of circles for everyone, for students, for staff conflict, and then they have the Restorative Practices Cafe, which is the way that they do professional development for the adults. And they meet every other week. So what are the outcomes? Well, here's what was said when they got the award from the Minnesota Association of Alternative Programs as the Alternative Program of the Year. Building community within their program using a restorative practices framework, CAPE has seen an increase of 10% in school graduation rates just in the first year of implementation. Implementing a program-wide restorative practices program that has built a sense of program pride among students and staff, resulting in a 58% decrease in behavior-related incidents. Over 60% of the student body at CAPE returned to the 2017-18 school year, which was an increased retention rate of 10% over prior years. That's money in the bank for a school. Let's see, what was the other thing they were going to say? The CAPE students have taken ownership of the restorative practices approach, completing student ambassador training and providing a peer level of welcoming face to new students, which is another thing that the student ambassadors do. You come into this school and people greet you and they look like you because they're kids, right? Welcoming the students to face new students, explaining the circle process, and offering peer support, instilling the sense of community that new students have not experienced in previous educational environments. So that's what that alternative learning program looks like. It is a smaller program, so it's quicker to do in a short period of time because you have a smaller staff and a smaller number of kids. But it is not impossible to do something like that in a larger school building. So there's that partnership with the local prison inmates also was included. They come to school, so the prisoners are not locked out of the community. They're actually still contributing to the community. And one of the ways that they have found to convince other administrators from other schools to do restorative practices is by inviting them to meet with prisoners in the prison and to talk with them about how those prisoners experience school and how that experience of school contributed to their life that resulted in them ending up in jail. In 5 minutes, somebody said, one prisoner convinced a whole group of administrators, left them weeping about what they had been doing. So it takes a lot of time. You have annual training for people. You're training all the time. You have professional development. It's not just, you've gone to this 3-hour training and now you know how to do it. No, 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 no. But I just want to remind you, you can tell everyone to breathe and smile. Those two things, remember, you don't need the grant for. Alternatives to expulsion. So here's another program from a large, the second largest second largest district in Minnesota is your standard United States urban district, Minneapolis. They have a variety of different things that they have done. It's a very interesting school district where they have attempted for about the last 15 to 20 years to scale up restorative practices, and many things challenge them in that journey. But one of the things they have been able to successfully do was to partner with the Minneapolis Legal Rights Center and put together an alternatives to expulsion program. So this is from an evaluation that was done on that program by the University of Minnesota. So what's the issue? Well, the issue is that kids do something wrong in a school, pretty serious stuff, drugs, possession, weapons possession, and assault violations. That's serious stuff. And in some schools, they've had it. They just can't deal with this anymore, and so they want to either expel the student They want to expel the student from their building. So this district has about 165 different buildings, right? So there's lots of buildings there to send somebody to. So if they're expelled from a particular building, the students and the parents are offered two options. You can be expelled from the school district, nobody takes that option. They can withdraw from the district, some people decide to do that. That outcome is not good. You withdraw from a school district, the possibility of you dropping on the school vastly increases. So they said, okay, we won't expel them, we'll offer them an administrative transfer to another Minneapolis public school or to an alternative learning center. Keep them in educational setting. But what they found was that when they did that, by the end of that school year, the kid had dropped out anyway. He transferred to another school and then that was it. And so then they said, okay, that's not working. Got to secure the safety of this community. It was not working in the school that they were in. So what can we do to keep them in an alternative learning center? Well, if you've done something that serious in the school, that means three things have fallen apart. Your relationship with the school, your relationship with your parents, and the relationship between the family and the school. And so we're going to have a restorative process called the Family Group Conference, a two-step process that will help to restore the kid back to their education. It's not as much about repairing harm as fixing that larger issue. So it's facilitated by the legal rights staff, not by somebody from the school, because remember, the relationship between the school and the family is broken. So we have a fair broker from the community who calls up the parents and says, do you want to do this? Because sometimes you just cannot jump over the hurdle of how people feel about school. And for some people, it's not just about their experiences with their kids, but it's a historical problem. Pete referenced the issues of the boarding schools. Think about the experiences of African American people in this country around education. For heaven's sake, no wonder they don't like walking into a school building. In some instances, it was dangerous, and that knowledge is passed down from generation to generation, whether or not people have talked about those stories or not. So having an outside person really makes a huge difference. The location of where you do the conferences also makes a big difference. First plan is to restore the student to their education and to make a plan for a short term, like 3 to 6 months. And then the second meeting is a plan to maintain the student's education going forward to graduation. So who were the people that were involved in this? I draw your attention to the green. Disproportionality exists all over the United States and all over the world. And so here we have 55% of the kids who were moved for expulsion were African American, and they're 33% of the general population. 12% of them were American Indian, and they are only 4% of the general population in Minneapolis. And then there's that other thing that nobody ever talks about. So are boys really that much worse than girls? Why is it always two-thirds to three-quarters of the boys are being suspended? Is that really about them? Or is that about us? Is that about the structures that we make for people? The evaluation turned out to be really interesting. First of all, they measured satisfaction. I like the conference. It helped me be more successful at school. I would recommend the conference to a friend. So I'm just wondering, are there any administrators in the audience? You don't have to raise your hand because my next question is kind of sarcastic. Have you done a customer satisfaction survey for your suspension and expulsion processes? You know, we're supposed to be using data-driven decision-making. Where's the data? I'm on a high horse. I'm sorry. And then here's the families. So the families also like this because, you know, 97% of them said that I would recommend this to my friends. Yeah, you know, that expulsion process was fantastic. I think every family should go through it. I don't think anybody says that. So what we had was that students thought it worked well, parents thought it worked well, and even more significant, not just that they liked it, but their grades improved. They accrued credit. They started marching towards graduation. The possibility that they were going to get sent out to the office decreased greatly. And the administrators were thankful finally for an alternative that repaired relationships with families and the student. Because it's not that administrators want to send kids away, but what's the alternative? And this is an alternative that helps to make it work better. So, challenges, time, persistence, equity, and policy. So, time's a problem. I was yesterday with a bunch of schools and they all said, well, we have to make this different, it has to be different next year. I just want you to know that's a bullfrog, because implementation takes time. But the other thing is that, thank the Lord I don't have to do this tomorrow, because after all, implementation takes time. It's a butterfly. It gives you the opportunity to stop and reflect and know that you can't do it all right away. And then I also want to challenge the question of time, where people say, I can't do this in school because I don't have the time. I'm supposed to be spending all this time on instruction, direct instruction. And I just want people to be honest about how well that direct instruction goes. Are you really spending it all on the Pythagorean theorem? Or was maybe 15 of the 16 minutes on trying to get people focused? Let's be honest. Because the research indicates that when you connect to the human network, you do honestly have more time across the whole spectrum of the school year for direct instruction. But if you don't, you're just white knuckling it, and I don't know if people are learning very well. So that's a conversation that people need to have. Persistence, we have to be persistent, we have to be persistent, we have to be persistent. That was one of the things that Carleton County people said, we just have to keep coming back over and over and over again. It doesn't happen over time. That was a 20-year process to get to that ALC to do that work. It started in the prisons 20 years ago. People move. You know, in school, state and federal policy change. You just go down one road, you finally got it figured out, and all of a sudden somebody's decided you have to do something entirely different. How many of you have been down that road? Isn't that exhausting? We gotta be persistent. Students graduate, students enroll, and things happen. But I would suggest that restorative practices gives us a way to manage these things. Because when people move, you bring them in, and you're having circle on a regular basis in your school, so you get to know them. And one of the things that's interesting about evaluation around restorative practices is that when people engage in them, stats stay, and they're less likely to be sick. That's a really nice thing, because you don't have to re-teach them. Equity, we have to think about who we allow to be in our schools around restorative practices. We don't, in Minnesota, talk about certifying anyone, because that's disrespectful to Stephanie Autumn, who is a Hopi elder, and for whom Circle was something that she was born into. It is disrespectful of the people who have lived experience, who need to be able to share that experience with the children who look like them. We need to disaggregate our data, and we need to circle up and talk about power and privilege on a regular basis. And I think that probably the easiest way to do that is to do that in Circle, because you can be most respectful that way. It's not always going to feel good, but at least at the end of the day, you're going to say, well, at least I was respectful. If it's not written down, it's not going to stay, so we have to reflect upon our policy. And for those of you who like lobbying the legislature and going to Albany, legal statutes are really useful. We have 3 of them in Minnesota. One with the Safe and Supportive Schools Act, which is the bullying act that tells us that restorative practices is recommended. And then there are those 2 statutes that refer kids to and adults to restorative practices. So I'd like to just end. I have never done this before, and now I've done it twice, where I use my phone to read something. Oh my gosh, it's just an amazing thing. You don't have to write it down. And of all things, I'm reading this off of Facebook. Oh my gosh, I'm an old woman. Okay, so I want to leave you with this story from Natasha Lepsinski, who is a restorative justice person in Minnesota, actually originally from Wisconsin. After being in spaces and schools where students are consistently being pushed out, where they are suspended for infractions while their white classmates are not, today was emotional. In the hallway at a school, a boy and a girl started verbally and then physically attacking each other. As I walked away with one youth, and a teacher walked away in the other direction with the other, trying to de-escalate the situation, a school police officer came around the corner. I assume that seeing the officer caused panic in the girl, and she took off running. What I didn't know is that this officer had already built a healthy and safe relationship with his student, so he knew what to do. He grabbed her. He didn't throw her to the ground. He didn't cuff her. He hugged her tightly until she felt limp in his arms, crying out so loud it echoed the halls. The sound she let out was a result of so many layers of deep anxiety, trauma, and violence that she has experienced in her life. Our teachers, our administrators, our police officers, our communities, all of us need to understand each other better through trauma-informed practices and restorative practices that shift our cultures from the inside out. That infraction could have gone very differently. But that student came back to Circle on her own and had a great day. And it didn't happen by accident. It happened through intentional understanding and relationship building with the school community and people who said yes to student investment and to disrupt the school-to-prison pipeline. Hashtag restorative practices, hashtag restorative justice, hashtag not a program, hashtag a way of life. Thank you very much.
So just so we all get grounded in terminology, if you talk about restorative justice and restorative practices, so in the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of groups in Minnesota, California, Illinois, and Colorado even that were looking at looking to indigenous practices of restorative justice as an alternative to courts, and even looking into some of the work that could be used as an alternative to suspensions in schools. So restorative justice is a practice where we bring all those people involved in a conflict of harm, and we bring them together, and whether it's a voluntary process, but we talk about what happened, what were people thinking, how are they impacted, and what can we do to repair the harm. And everyone has a voice in creating that solution, and it's a voluntary process. So, but it's something that we can't say that police departments need to do restorative justice, or judges need to do restorative justice, or like deans or principals need to do restorative justice. We need to look at the community needs to do it, because we can't just put people together who've been involved in a conflict and expect them to have the skill set to repair the harm. And so restorative practices, it's a shift, it's an opening up to look at all the skills we need to have in order to resolve a conflict. So if you look at over on this continuum, we have the building relationships part, and these are just things that we need to do with people weekly to practice this. We need to practice speaking from the heart, listening carefully, asking open-ended questions, and circling up, just being in a relationship with people. And if community centers were doing this, or neighborhood centers, churches, schools, if people have an opportunity to do this and practice this, then they're forming more connections with each other. And what we found in schools is that when students and staff have better relationships with one another, they're less likely to have conflict. The middle is something that once we've created a community, then we want to maintain that community, and we practice these skills. And restorative practices, it's all these things we do to build these skills, to build our capacity. So hearing every voice, participate, cooperate, and be part of the solution, model the behavior you want to see, and discussing norms and values. So what this would look like, in a, say if I'm in a school setting, or this could be an after-school program or a church group, when we get together, the students, we talk about the values that we have. What do we need to do to be our best self? So for example, I need people to be honest. I need people to show respect, to be non-judgmental. So the first thing we do is we talk about our values. And then we talk about norms. Like when we get together in a circle, some basic rules or norms we're going to have is we're going to use a talking piece, and one person is going, we're going to pass it around, and one person will speak at a time, and we'll all listen to that person when they speak. And if you do this on a regular basis and we practice these skills, then we're teaching people active listening. We're teaching self-expression. we're teaching self-management and reflection.
Okay, so really, what does all that look like? And so restorative practice is really built on a continuum. We can always, at any and every time, always have an opportunity to be restorative. It goes from a less formal response to a more formal response. The less formal takes less time, less planning, and less impact because it's shorter period, to a more formal time, which takes more time, more planning, and it has a greater impact for change in behavior. And so, just so we're all on the same page, restorative practices is built on the principle that strong positive relationships build strong positive communities. And so this is a lot of things that we do innately, but this right here tells us how we can do what we do implicitly, explicitly. So it gives us words to what we do, and when we are in community and when we are in good relationships every day, I can speak to what I'm doing here by using restorative practices. So when we talk about effective statements, we're saying how I feel about something. And so what we're trying to do with our young people to empower voice in community is to have people speak how your behavior is impacting me, my I statement, taking accountability and responsibility for how I'm feeling and then expressing that to you. So kind of owning that. Andy talked about values, what the values are that we need to be our best selves with people. This morning I shared my value that I needed my best self to be with people is to thank God this morning because I only got a little bit of time on my own to do that personally. So I needed to express that value. A lot of times in my class I use the value of flexibility. And that's because sometimes the energy that comes in the class, I might need to switch things up. And I need that value to be honored and not my students looking at my syllabus going, you didn't cover this today. But I valued what we were doing in the class today and the energy that was in the room, so I might want to mix that up a little bit. Also, sometimes, especially when you're working with young people, that value is respect. I need you to respect me because the fact of the matter is that young people today are not the young people of yesterday. They are my 12-year-olds that I have my experience in working in a middle school are more adult-like than they are child-like. And so my 12-year-olds in my middle school would go home and do the same things that adults would do. They would go home and take care, I mean really take care of brothers and sisters. They would go home and actually cook and iron and actually really have responsibilities of a child, of an adult, but in a child body. And so when they came to school looking for respect, I knew what that meant. And so it's really defining those values so that I can be my best self in that space and in that community. So all of that really comes down to the value of really making that effective question. Taking responsibility of how you feel and being able to relay that. But also taking the responsibility of letting other people know how your behavior is impacting me. If I'm feeling frustrated with you, if I'm feeling mad or upset about something, I'm able to take responsibility of that feeling and relay that feeling to you and allow you the opportunity to also relay that feeling back to me. And so I learned this the hard way with my daughter, trying to make an effective statement. And I said to her one time, I was punishing her, I was so frustrated, I told her to go to her room. You know, I didn't want to see you. The same thing we do in schools, the same thing we do with incarceration. Just go to your room. And so my daughter made it halfway up the stairs and she said, good, I like my room. Everything I like is in my room. And so I'm like, shoot. She goes, I'm going to go and I'm playing my room. But what I wanted my daughter to do is I wanted her to go to the room, think about how her behavior impacted me, and change her behavior. Some magical, change the behavior fairy was in the room putting dust all over the place saying, she's going to be better when she comes out, right? No, my daughter's in there thinking about how much she's the victim. And that's what we do when we isolate people, when we send them away. They go back and they think about how they are the victim, how bad they're feeling about things that are happening right now. And so providing the opportunity to ask the person what happened, who was impacted, what were you thinking at the time, letting them know how their behavior has impacted you, and then providing the opportunity for them to be able to change their behavior. And so all that can happen with a simple, effective question. Do I have to ask them all at the same time? No, I can ask one or two. Who was impacted by that? On the playground, two people are playing on the playground. Who is impacted by your behavior of you pushing that person down the slide? Me and her. What should you do next time? We should take turns. Awesome, you did that. Let's do that. Let's take turns. And no punishment, no everything. We corrected the behavior. They know what to do better next time. And they did it all themselves. And so this takes less and less time, though it took me a long time to explain it. It does take less and less time. So our small impromptu conference That is really just a short conversation, asking several of the effective questions, going what happened and who was harmed, or what happened and what you need to make things right. Just a small group coming together and having those conversations. That can be positive and that can be, I don't want to say negative, it can be positive and responsive. And so positive in that we're just meeting and greeting each other and asking each other what's happening, or responsive and saying, you know, this happened, we need to make it right sometimes. We have several responsive circles in this community to talk about how that has impacted the community as a whole, not just the university community, but the community as a whole. And then what can we do to come together more and to respect each other more as we live together in community. So our most formal part of the restorative justice continuum is formal conferencing. And we really, this is a trained, facilitated way of speaking about how we bring a victim and offender together and how we can come up and with an agreement and a resolution where all voices are heard. So it's a victim-centered approach. A victim talks about the needs that they have because a harm, and we call a harm a crime or a misconduct or anything that has caused a breakdown in relationship. How can we repair that? And what does that look like? And so those are systems that are in place and processes that are in place in the community for members to come together and have that conversation. And we have done a number of them within our organization. We've done a sexual assault. We've done victim and offenders where, again, in this community where something was stolen, property was stolen, and the woman did not want to go to the police because she really just felt sorry for the college student that did it. And so we came together and we had a conference about that and we came up with an agreement. And the great thing about that is that the fraternity found out so many resources that they didn't even know about that they had in this community and started using those resources that were in community. What we realize now is that there are some other things that need to be in place because not everyone is ready to come and be completely restored or ready and able to have that complete process of what restorative practices looks like. Sometimes we need something like conflict coaching. So conflict coaching is really a one-on-one conversation with people who want to still be empowered to be able to repair harm, maybe self-harm or harm with other people, but they're not ready to actually have these conversations that might happen in the impromptu conference or the circle process or the conferencing process. So this is a facilitator that can come in and have a conversation with people and coach people through the conflict. And this, at this point, could also get people back here to go to this restorative conference where they can meet people together as a victim and offender and come up with an agreement, but they might not be ready for this yet. And that could be from trauma or just a lack of ability to be able to face another person. So giving people those resources and those coaching abilities to get them to the place that they need to be. And it's still self-directed. So it's still not our law enforcement or higher authority, if you want to go to schools or deans or anyone taking responsibility of this. It's a trained person or a trained facilitator or a trained mediator having this conversation with people. Okay, so what does all of this look like together in community? I'm going to let Julie tell us.
Okay. So I will add to your question about organizational and workplace. On the last slide, Dina talked a little bit about mediation and community mediation. And so when does mediation fit within the continuum of restorative practices? It's when it's done in such a way that there's mutual respect, as Nancy said earlier, mutual respect, dignity, and empathetic communication. And not all mediation is geared toward having all of those values as part of the process, but there are mediation models that do, and that's where we would advocate that those be included on the continuum. In order for an area to be truly restorative, and something that Dina's really been leading the way in terms of pushing is, could Buffalo area, could we be a restorative city? Could Western New York be a restorative community? That's a heavy lift. When you hear what Nancy said before about just in a school, we're talking 2 to 5 years of implementation. I've been doing this work long enough to know that in 2005 we started having these conversations. But that's okay. We're here where we are now. And now we're really excited about a pilot program that we're going to be launching this summer, later in the spring, that will be operating in family court, in Erie County Family Court. We have a champion Judge Brenda Friedman in family court, who's been leading the charge and has said that, you know, we are on the verge, because of New York State's raise the age legislation, we're on the verge of having a lot more 16 and 17-year-olds in family court as part of the juvenile justice system that were formerly in the adult criminal justice system. And how are we going to gear up for this? What are we going to do? And instead of just looking at, we are going to need way more probation officers, which is true. We're going to need more vehicles for probation officers. We're going to need more staff at DSS. And holy cow, we're going to need more judges. What she said is, well, actually, all that might be true, but we also need more services to assist 16 and 17-year-olds and their families and community members to try to address a whole range of harms and incidents so that they're not swept up into the system and going further and further and ending up in the adult criminal justice system and ending up in prison. And so she was willing to take a step back. She engaged us at CRJ. She brought together a group of stakeholders from Department of Social Services, probation, a local school out in another county that had been really successful in a full-blown implementation of restorative practices, the county attorney, which is the prosecuting attorney locally, and legal aid, attorneys for the child who would represent children in the system. And so we started to have some conversations about what could this look like. And people were talking about things like we could do circles. Where is that on here? We could do, so really in the restorative justice black area, not a triangle, but you see it in there. We could do, let's pick one of these processes and try it out. And what we suggested is, based on our experience with Erie County Restorative Justice Coalition and CRJ, is we don't know what's going to work best. But we think a lot of these different tools are going to be really important for families, whether it be a circle process, whether it be an actual victim offender conference, potentially a community mediation, which could be a parent and a child actually negotiating house rules and the way that they're going to interact at home, curfew, homework, chores, you know, that kind of thing. And also, we should really try to include conflict coaching in this pilot so that if somebody is referred to the pilot and they have the opportunity to have the matter adjusted, not even brought into the system at all, and they're not ready to do the kind of perspective taking that it takes in order to have mutual respect for whom you're talking with, treating people with dignity and be able to communicate in an empathetic fashion. And frankly, how many of us can do that right away, especially if we're told that we should do it at 3 o'clock next Tuesday in someone's office? So conflict coaching allows that individual to work with a coach, a staged process, to really think about the incident, think about how that might have affected the other people involved, consider how that affected them as an individual that they might not be even realizing, and then also to craft what we call in conflict coaching the best story, which is really what is the best outcome that we could expect from this situation going forward. So we've been able to negotiate a pilot program that will offer all of those different services. We at the center will have a chance, our staff will have a chance to screen and talk with parents and talk to the young people and figure out which process might be the most appropriate for the situation, for their readiness to participate, and for the outcome that's necessary going forward. And then what we're really excited about is we'll be working with other trained community member volunteers to both facilitate some of these processes, but also to sit in some of them as community members and resource providers to help give these young people and their families what they need to be successful. So it's a big undertaking. We don't know exactly how things are going to play out. That's why it's a pilot program. We know that not everything is going to work, but we have a lot of evidence in looking at strategies elsewhere to know that this is a huge opportunity to try this in a system, because at conferences like this, we're most often talking about schools and what schools need to do. And that's true, right? But the system is also not off the hook. So to be able to use something like Raise the Age, which system folks are very trepidatious about, you know, what is this really going to mean to have all of these young people suddenly in the family court system, as an opportunity to try restorative practices at this level, may also allow us then to have a cohort of trained, experienced people that can then be pulled into school communities that are trying to implement these programs, and also community programs like the Peace Hubs. So we're pretty excited about this. We see this as a way to touch multiple systems.
So we are going to be discussing community organizing for restorative justice, a little bit about Voice Buffalo. Again, my name is Christina Sturdy, and I'm a volunteer with Voice Buffalo. I was just about to ask how many people here were familiar with restorative justice practices before today?
A little bit.
And how many people have participated in a conference, a restorative justice conference, or a peace circle previously as well? Excellent. Oh, wonderful. This is great. So Amy and Nikki are going to talk a little bit about not only restorative justice, but also a little bit about circles, both in the community. Nikki's going to start with circles in the community and as well in corrections as well. So I'm going to hand it off.
So, I'm Amy. Mick is a member of Voice through St. Joe's University. I am a member of Voice through Nativity Catholic Church. But Voice Buffalo is a community organizing. There's Coalition for the Economic Justice, there's Just Resisting, there's a lot of community organizers in the area. You may have heard of Push Buffalo, right? Voice Buffalo has 50 plus either faith congregations, all kinds of faiths. We're not just Christian, we welcome everyone, even just people who don't actually believe in anything special. But we're groups, because we find that power comes when each of us realizes our own power and we work together, joined, like Nikki said, to collaborate with other organizations. That's what changes systems. And that's what Voice Buffalo is trying to do, creating relationships among member congregations or community organizations. Push Buffalo is a member of our organization as well. So what we want to do, and that's what we'll show in a minute, is Voice Buffalo focuses on 3 task forces. We're not going to get into those right now because we want you to get to stand up. But the 3 of us are on the Criminal Justice Restorative Justice Task Force, where we're trying to find a way to, like what Nancy was saying, cut down the school to prison pipeline in a way that restores the harm instead of penalizing somebody. But there's a group, the coalition, that put this day on. They're working mostly, and that's what Nancy was talking about, if I was a triangle, they're working with schools, right? Then there's another group that's working with the legal system to try to get these conferences going in the legal system. Voice, we see our role as doing it in the neighborhoods. So what we want to do is work with any organization that wants to, or if you don't want to be a member of Voice, what we want you to do today is leave with a way to beef up your own community if you want, and that's what we'll practice in a minute. But we think strong neighborhoods would be vital, because if we can be part of this movement that gets another law enforcement assisted diversion program started, we want, say if somebody, Nikki cited in another session, a student in the UB Heights area stole some really valuable family mementos from a woman, and instead of taking them to the police, they sat down and had a conference, which is the formal end of the practice, right? So they sat down, and the student was from the neighborhood, the neighbor was in the neighborhood, so the neighborhood was trusted. And what we want to develop keepers and places where if something happens in the neighborhood, we have 50 keepers who can just come and get this issue addressed right then and there and restore, but also build relationships. Because you know, if you've been in a circle, no one's bad and no one's good. Let's move together to right this situation. So our work at Voice is to create these peace hubs. Mickey St. Joe's is becoming one. We get together once a month at Bailey and Kensington at the Art Healing Center, and we hold circles. So if that's something you're interested in, there's tables downstairs for sign-in, and we have information on that. But that's what we're about. So the task force is really centered on how to reduce this school-to-prison pipeline. And we just wanted to throw this out to give you a context before we move into our next piece.
More than half of victims of violent crime don't even call the police in the first place. They prefer nothing to everything we have to offer. The vast majority of crime survivors' pain goes unhealed. What the existence of restorative justice means is that we can no longer pretend we don't know what else to do. As a country, we're really good at punishment. It's passive, it doesn't require people to act, to think, it certainly doesn't require them to change. When we lock people up, we excuse them from their responsibility to answer for what they've done. Restorative justice is a process to hold them accountable. It's a tool. People take turns answering questions like what happened, what needs arise, whose responsibility is it to meet those needs, and how is that person going to do it? It requires someone to take responsibility, to repair things as much as possible, and to never commit that harm again. This isn't about feeling sorry, it's about doing sorry. Things like go to school, get a job, pay restitution, apologize, do community service. Restorative justice practices have been used to address low-level infractions like vandalism, up to addressing the impact of murders on the surviving family members. Restorative justice processes are first and foremost about meeting the needs of people who are hurt. Sometimes the person who can make the greatest contribution to a survivor's healing is the person who harmed them. To come through trauma, we need answers to our questions. To say, my life was never the same after you hurt me like that. Crime survivors want the most safety possibly available. So if incarceration actually produced safety, we would have the safest country in human history. That's not what we have. The core drivers of violence are shame, isolation, and inability to meet one's economic needs, and exposure to violence. And we bake those into prisons to try and keep people from committing further violence. Incarceration exposes people to exactly the things that increase the likelihood that they'll go on to harm others. People who are hurt deserve a process that will help them heal. People who are responsible for crime have an obligation to be accountable for that. All of us deserve responses to crime that actually make us safer. Our current criminal justice system doesn't deliver any of those, and restorative justice at its best delivers them all.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah. So what we are doing at those monthly sessions, if you look at this spectrum, and you don't want to look there, you can look there. You can look that way, that's fine. So you'll see the whole continuum of restorative practices. Where we think community organizing fits into restorative practices and where they really come together well is in this spot. Because in community organizing, we do a lot of one-on-ones, which people mostly call coffee or breakfast or dinner, right? You don't go around and say you want to have a one-on-one. But what a one-on-one entails in community organizing is, sure, we want to know like what your happiest memory is, but we also want to know what drives you to do the work you do. What gets you up every morning? What's your self-interest? That's the term of community organizing, which we don't use when we're talking. But it's asking you how you feel about things and what gets you angry, what gets you frustrated, what gets you energized. And then what we do with all those one-on-ones is start to cull and start to figure out which issues are starting to be mentioned more and more. That's how Voice came up with 3 task forces, is by listening to people who are affected by the issues. We don't just sit in an office, 5 people, and decide what we want to work on. We do a lot of coffees with a lot of people. And that monthly Peace Hub session that I told you about, that's one way that we think a circle is just one great big one-on-one, where everybody gets to hear each other. The last session we did was an issue that was raised and took 4 months to get together. Neighbors and community members in the Bailey, Kensington area worked for a long time, I don't even remember how long, on a mural that would celebrate and lift up and look like the people in Bailey and Kensington. And they worked months on it. Came together, it was a big celebration, and then a white supremacist organization came and defaced it. So took this high right back down, and that was September. So in April, we got the neighbors together. We didn't get the white supremacists together because circles have 3 components that are very important. Nancy mentioned one of them, choice, right? You have to want to be in the circle. The other one is confidentiality. You need to be able to say what you want, trusting that no one will repeat it. Exactly what you said. But we want people to leave having learned something from what we said, right? And then there's consensus. So this group got together last month, and those of us who weren't directly involved listened, and they shared what that meant to them to have this mural defaced. And we all learned a lot about that issue and poverty and racism just from people sharing their stories. So what we're going to invite you to do, in another workshop, you may have already done this or not, you will participate in a circle where you'll pass, the youth will lead you in a circle where everybody's sitting together. We want to give you a little sense of the power and the effectiveness of a one-on-one. But we're going to kind of do it like speed one-on-one. So what we're and Alton Sterling got killed, we brought the 2 parishes together to start talking about racial relations and what that does. And the question we started with, 45 people showed up in a very humid gym in August. 45 people showed up and sat on metal chairs and answered, when you hear the word race relations, what evokes fear or what evokes anger? And we were there for 2.5 hours. So you never know what questions will work or what questions don't, which is why the community helps generate the questions, as do the keepers, because we're listening, right? So keepers don't decide on the questions. All these conversations help us generate and listen for the questions. Got it? And then the next thing I'll say is next time you say goodbye to somebody, you might want to thank them for sharing their story. Okay? That's also big when we're in practices. Okay, got it? So one more little piece. So here's what are 1 to 3 words, you can go over, you can go under. What are 3 words that describe the community or neighborhood where you live? You'll both get to answer these. So neighborhood, community, name 1 to 3 words that describe where you live. And you can expand or just list them. Please start now.
My family, we grew up in down south of
It's about 15 more seconds. Stay silent.
That's about it for you right now.
My heart is stopping right
9, 8,
Plethora comes to mind. Cultural
4, 3, 2, and 1. Right, now we'll turn it around. And please, the listener, please share 1 to 3 words that describe the community where you live. Please start now. About 10 more seconds. 7, 6, 5, 4. Right. So if we were in a real one-on-one community organizing, what we would do with this is see which ones align and say, hey, or I might know somebody. So the next piece of a circle, but also of community organizing, is finding A, what we have in common, but 2, finding maybe consensus on something. Do we want to bring somebody else into this? Who do we want to reach out to include who's missing from the table? Or who do we bring this issue to, right? So that's what these do. And when you're working with a community group and you do this for an hour, everybody gets to talk to everybody in a different way. So that's the idea. Okay. This is where did you move from last time? That went from this way? Will you move 4 people to your right? 4. People on the outside circle, and you can say thank you to the person behind you. 4 people to your Feel free to introduce yourselves, and then when you're done introducing yourself, please silence. And when you've done answering and when the room is silent,
I'm learning how to do the now.
Notice what happens, like somebody's voice comes out and we hold it confidentially, right? If we're in these, we aren't talking anymore, we have to hold another cares where it's sacred as well, right? So there's just room for everybody's story in the same room. Okay, so here's the question, both of you get to answer. Name one of the happiest times in your life. Moments, experiences, you do whatever you want with that. Name one of the happiest moments, times, events in your life. Please start now. You have a minute and 15 seconds. Do with it what you want. You have to talk to You know, it wasn't like, you know what I mean? So now the listener becomes the speaker, and you are ready to share the happiest, and please explain. Go.
It was already mine. My daughter's so excited. I was about to say I got this all you see is just the snap. It's not really good. It's just like really relaxed. Especially the way I do it. I went through 17
We have 10 more seconds.
Get together tomorrow. Go back and
And 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Thank you. I had to haul y'all in for the happiest moments, right? As opposed to the angry and frustrated ones. But if we had moved on and I asked a second one and you were with the same person for 40 minutes, maybe you would be more comfortable. Some people, you can't assume nothing in circles or judge nothing. Some people might not have a happy moment. So we don't have to talk them into having one. They might really not have one. So if we are holding space for that person, we sit in compassionate silence. And you can do whatever you want in your moment. You can look somebody in the eye. You can go inward if you're uncomfortable with that and hold energy and send positive. Right? When someone's in pain and can't verbalize it and pass, we get to just hold compassionate silence and energy for that person. That's what I love about this practice is even if I find myself judging. So in that circle I mentioned where we brought the mural neighbors, I was on the outside. And I had something happen to me that was totally separate from that topic. But we all went around and introduced ourselves and said why we were there. And I couldn't speak. I wanted to hear what everyone had to say. but I couldn't speak. And I chose to pass. Everybody could have judged why I passed, but I knew in my heart what I wanted to do there and what I could contribute. And Dina, who kept the circle, asked me again, and I said no again. That's what we also have to allow the freedom to do that in compassion. But judging, right? People are quick to judge what I have to contribute and she's not contributing, right? When we do this with 7th and 8th graders, I do this with them at school, and it's to teach them how to hold compassion for each other, even if we're all just trying to get along.
We will really take a step into the African American indigenous process of what restorative practices looks like from that culture. And so just to explain that and to see that, we have with us today the African American Culture Center. So let's put our hands together.
Greetings to you all. We'd like to thank our invitation to be here. With relationship to our agency, the African American Culture Center is a non-for-profit organization that's located on the east side of Buffalo, New York. Our agency has programming for urban children, some at disadvantages, some not. We have an after-school program that helps them with their homework. We have African dancing and drum classes that help them to foster self-esteem, working with others. A lot of the programs that we do throughout the year, special event programs, we have a summer program, Jumping Jambalayas, where our students have the opportunity to experience a variety of different cultures. They've learned ballroom dancing, they've had violin classes. So when we talk about restorative practices, which is more recently something new that's being talked about, in relationship to our children and our community, I think it's a very awesome approach. Of course, we would rather have our kids move in their mindset along the lines of resolve, as opposed to just always expressing what the feeling is. You know, the behaviors that follow are sometimes, driven by traumatic experiences that they might be dealing with that we know nothing about. So what I see happening with a restorative practice is that it allows everyone involved to get a realistic look, a look at the child, what they're feeling, if it's an educational environment or even at home, or just something going on in the community. Because in our tradition, we believe it takes the whole village to raise our children. That's going along the mindset of everybody being conscientious that we need to find resolve. It doesn't matter so much sometimes who did it as to more so why did they do it. You know, what can we do as a neighbor, a parent, a teacher, a facilitator to help our children understand that it's important for us to inherit a mindset that's geared in what? Unity, love, respect, and understanding. So that is my thought. I speak from a little research that I've done and study on the practice. We are applying the practice to our program with our children at the Cultural Center. So we're grateful for an opportunity to be here. And on behalf of our agency, we have put together a presentation for you. Our first number is going to be a modern piece. And it's Nina Simone's tribute for women. So relax and enjoy. Then we'll have a drum introduction and selection from our wonderful master drummers, followed by West African dance. Okay, feel free in your seat, especially when those drums get to playing. You might want to scream, you might want to shout, What we do, if you see something that you really like, you can yell out, yay bo. Can I hear yay bo? Yay bo! That's what we want to hear when we're dancing, because that makes us even give more. Bless you all. Thanks for having us, and enjoy.
Ladies and gentlemen, Marsha Ambrosia, and Jim. My skin's black, my arms are long, my hair is woolly, and my back is strong.
Kaviosile, Kaviosile, ule oliloko, aloko loke abana hina konya abanya misisi oluosa, ariabo keke kawo, keke kawo, keke kawo, keke kawo, keke kawo. Ibola ti ṣàgbà, Ibola ti ṣe, Ibola ti ṣàgbà, Ibola ti ṣe, ha!
Ibola fi ṣàgbà, Ibola fi ṣe, ha! Ibola fi ṣàgbà, Ibola fi ṣe,
Ho!
Ibola fi ṣàgbà, Ibola fi ṣe, Ibola fi ṣàgbà, Ibola fi ṣe,
Come on!
Ibola fi ṣàgbà, Ibola fi ṣe, Ibola fi ṣàgbà, Ibola fi ṣe,
Ibola ti ṣàgbà, Ibola ti ṣe, Ibola ti ṣàgbà, Ibola ti ṣe, ẹ̀ṣẹ̀ nìkan nù, Ibola ti ṣàgbà, Ibola ti ṣe,
Ibola fi ṣàgbà, Ibola fi ṣe, Ibola fi ṣàgbà, Ibola fi ṣe,
ẹ̀ṣẹ̀ nìkan nù,
Ibola fi ṣàgbà, Ibola fi ṣe, Ibola fi ṣàgbà, Ibola fi ṣe, Ibola fi ṣàgbà, Ibola fi ṣe,
ẹ̀ṣẹ̀ nìkan nù,
Ibola fi ṣàgbà, Ibola fi ṣe, 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 she gon' do it.
To be honest with you, I'm also a little more nervous than a long-tailed cat in a room full of rockers. Public speaking is not my forte, but after getting involved in restorative justice, I'm happy to share my message, I guess, with anyone that will listen. I especially like to thank Dina Thompson and Brandy Loveland for being such gracious hosts. I have two objections this afternoon. The first, of course, is to present an extremely interesting presentation that imparts a great deal of knowledge while engaging you in a wicked good back and forth conversation during the question and answering period. I am going to be speaking today about a truly collaborative model of restorative justice that brings the police, the courts, and the communities together to broaden the base of referrals. Remember that, broaden the base of referrals. I'm going to be talking about a model that truly has restorative powers, not only between victim and offender, but also the traditional community justice system members in the community. But let's be honest. The objective of the afternoon speaker is to stop you from falling asleep. Now, after what we just saw, but do not underestimate my ability to put you to sleep. That's the late great Sammy and Pepper, and after about 5 minutes of listening to me talk, they're usually comatose. For a little dog fact, you know why it's so comforting to have a dog around when you're feeling blue, feeling a little down? Because they never ask why. How did I become involved in restorative justice? How did I become a restorative justice cheerleader? My background, I just recently finished a 41-year career in policing. 24 years, I was a police chief in 2 New England states, Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Concord, Massachusetts and Moultonborough, New Hampshire. I currently am a member of the New Hampshire Juvenile Parole Board. I'd like to tell you that it was a natural progression as a forward-thinking, enlightened young police officer who saw the need for a different way of approaching crime, victimization, police-community relations, but that would be lying. I came into restorative justice the same way a lot of police administrators during that time period did, kicking and screaming. Early in my career, I became frustrated with how cases were handled by the courts. I was advised by older officers to ignore the outcomes. Just do your job, testify in court and walk away. If not, you'll end up disgruntled with an ulcer. Later on, I was promoted and placed down at the local district court as the police prosecutor. I had victims that would come up to me and say, people I knew personally, they would say they appreciated the department's effort, but if the same thing happened again, they weren't going to call. They were frustrated with the way they were treated and not happy with the outcome. I had defense attorneys lament that the young person involved needed some help, just needed to be pointed in the right direction. I shrugged my shoulders at the time and said, listen, we're doing the best we can. I spent the next number of years moving through the ranks, eventually becoming chief. It was during this time, in 1999, that I was invited to hear Judge Barry Stewart speak about this concept called restorative justice. It was at a community meeting in Concord, Massachusetts. I'd never heard of it. It made an excuse not to show up. Later, I was approached by 2 local women who were involved in the prison outreach program in Concord. Concord is the home to 2 state prisons. They were the ones who invited Judge Stewart to speak. For this presentation, I'll call them Gene and Joan. Oh, that's their names. They were meeting with dead ends, trying to get a restorative justice program started at the court and wanted to know if I had any ideas. I agreed to meet, basically because I had to. You didn't say no to these women. But before I met, they asked me to read a book that they would be dropping off at the station. Outwardly, I agreed. Oh, I'd be glad to. Internally, I was screaming and rolling my eyes. Homework. Great. The book was called Changing Lenses by Howard Zehr. If we sat down, we could build a program and work around the minefield that was laid out in front of us. I suggested that we build the model after a domestic violence partnership initiative that we had started a few years older with the community, between the police and the community. Make it a 50-50 ownership. Nothing breaks down barriers better than 2 diverse groups working together to achieve the same goal. Many meetings, a lot of work, and we eventually formed an organization called Restorative Justice Circle. We received training and took our first case. Other departments showed interest in joining. A nonprofit was formed later, which then became known as Communities for Restorative Justice. It is now 19 years later. There are 20 different police departments involved. The county district attorney's office is involved. At a recent event last week, it was their yearly event, the C4RJ. The Attorney General from Massachusetts was the keynote speaker. She thanked the organization for helping pass recent criminal justice reform legislation that was just signed by the governor. That legislation involved enabling language to bring restorative justice into the courtroom. We could never do it before in Massachusetts. We are now the 500-pound gorilla that can't be ignored. And what I mean by that is, in the beginning, when we had nothing but roadblocks in front of us by members of the criminal justice family, I just told everybody, just hang in there. Slowly, we'll gain weight, and someday we'll be the 500-pound gorilla that they just can't ignore. We are now that 500-pound gorilla. I'm now going to talk more in depth about the C4RJ model, how it is structured, and how you can get there if you so choose. But before I do, it is important to briefly look at two other models of restorative justice. Disputes over program ownership have long been a theme in restorative justice. Ownership matters in a big way. It determines who's articulating the guiding principles, who calls the shots, who has the veto authority, who's designing policy and process, and ultimately, who can best serve the needs of the individuals and communities affected by crime. I hate reading off a paper like this, but believe me, I've been speaking for an hour, you would have got about 20 minutes worth of good material. So. There we go. If the CJ system is owned, if the CJ system, if the community, all right, let's look at it. If the criminal justice system owns restorative justice, does that mean it's been co-opted by people that are constrained by rules and regulations? Has the community sold out? These are programs that particularly run out of either police departments or courts. Has the community sold restorative justice out? Quite often, there is very little community buy-in. It is looked at as just another system program. If the community owns it, does that mean that that normal justice has been subverted? Is the rule of law and rights discarded? Will pure community ownership of criminal justice cases widen the divide between police, courts, and the community? To the system, members of the community, the traditional community criminal justice system, they'll say it lacks legitimacy. In Concord, Massachusetts, and now, as I said earlier, in Concord, Massachusetts, and now Greater Boston, a different model just celebrated 18 years into success. Communities for Restorative Justice, C4RJ, employs a genuine police-community partnership where, and this is important, all aspects of the program are jointly owned, from board membership to joint presence at the case level. C4RJ offers a promising model for restorative justice programs, especially forward-thinking communities that are committed to breaking down barriers. Earlier in our formation, Howard Zare visited the program, and at that time, it was about 10 years ago, he felt it was a one-of-a-kind approach in the world, and Howard had traveled extensively. We are proud to say, and that's because he said it was a true partnership between restorative justice communities and the police. We are proud to say that this model is now being replicated in other states. Let's take a look at how the program is structured so you'll have a basis to understand as I discuss how it operates. The original organization involved one department. So the partnership was between Concord PD, my PD, and the civilians. I was a member of the board of directors. As the organization grew, we couldn't have all of the chiefs be board members. Most didn't want to, but at the same time, concern grew that civilians would steer the direction of the case in the program. That's called police paranoia. Out of that concern and the concerns that the board wanted to keep the departments involved and informed, the police council was formed. You see the second red box. It would act as a circuit breaker and show potential departments that while we were a collaborative, the fear of a runaway board was limited. As you can see by the chart, the C4RJ Board of Directors oversees the executive director. She has a staff of 2 people off to, am I right? She oversees case coordinators. They're all volunteers at this point, and the 3 teams. The teams are set up regionally, so that if a case comes out of an XYZ community, we can have members of the XYZ community sit on the case. It also has, it's built out so that there are people with different talents that are on different teams. It's not just randomly set up. The difference is, you'll see the C4RJ Police Council is at the same level with the C4RJ Board of Directors. Policy and practice runs down between the Police Council and the Executive Director. At the same time, the Police Council provides the officers individually from the departments to sit on the individual cases. That can be very controversial. I'll get to that in a couple of minutes. Have I lost you? Anybody asleep yet? He's heard me speak too. So earlier I talked about the police as a coercive presence. That's controversial when you say a police officer is going to sit in on these circles. The role we found the role of an officer in a case very important to, one, provides a measure of safety to the victim. Underscores the seriousness of the offense. It outlines potential consequences in the system. There's always questions about, well, if this was, what would happen? The officer is there to answer those questions, but not to opine, not to give opinions, just to act as a balance for knowledge. Watch for proportionality. What we found is some of the early cases, the agreements were a little too heavy-handed. And sometimes the officer would say, 100 hours of community service, we might be overburdening this. Remember, we want to make sure that he continues to go to school, etc. So it actually helps in that way. This is another piece we found, and a lot of these things we found afterwards. We found that the officer was very good in helping the offender during the repair phase, when the offender is working with someone from the circle to carry out what the agreement was, and it may be stumbling. It was the officer who, at the end of the closing circle, had built up a relationship with the offender that was most helpful in going and contacting them and saying, what's going on? And then the officer literally would come back and say, give him a little break, give her a little break, having some problems in this way, having some issues here, I suggest we extend, etc. And in the beginning, everybody's going, wow, you're the one who, and now you're sitting here and being the champion for this person? That was a very positive outcome that we didn't see. The officer also acts as an antidote to labeling. Labeling is a huge problem. And when I was listening in on some of the earlier breakout sessions, and we were talking about different programs or something, if you take someone who's been labeled, and police do it all the time, and you can put them through a program, but if you put them back into the community without reducing that label, and the police department's going to treat them the same way they did before they came into the program, because they've had no input into what had happened. And as we know, people will act in the role that they are placed. So it's no different than taking someone out of a neighborhood and then returning them into that neighborhood and expecting them to act differently. With the police, if you have someone that is labeled and then you put them through some sort of a program and they come back out again and then they reintroduced to the police, they're going to treat them the same way they did before the person in the program, because they've had no input into it. We found that the relationships between the police officer that was involved in the program, that sat in on the circle, and the offender, more often than not, was the strongest bond that came out of that program, out of that circle. And that's something that we had never anticipated. All right, where was it? So the process. Initially, a case comes in from the police, the prosecutor, the courts, and the community. Sometimes cases come into the community, they're not referred to the police. In other words, it wasn't something where the police responded to, but the case comes into the network. There's an internal review for fit by the C4RJ staff to make sure that the case fits. Assignments are made to staff. We have an opening circle, just exactly the way that it plays out for all the circles that you've been familiar with. Opening circle with an agreement, we work with the facilitators, and then there's a closing circle. What's a good referral? The offender takes responsibility. Victim allows the process to go forward. We can reasonably assure a safe process for victim, offender, and staff. Those are the main things that we look for. We do not rule out a referral if the offender has a bad attitude, is remorseful, or has a bad reputation. Remember, I'm thinking from the police side of things here, because these are big problems for police officers to deal with. We won't rule out a referral if the offender is overly remorseful. Sometimes the police officer will come and say, we don't need to do a circle with this fellow. I mean, look at him. He knows exactly what he did. He's heartbroken over the whole thing. We have to tell them, remember, the victim may need this. So let's talk to the victim and see what has to do. So victim-centered, victim-centered. And certain types of cases or ages involved. We don't stop referrals because of certain types of crime. We deal with we're doing it for 19 years now, and we've been dealing with some very serious crimes. The other thing is ages. And this is, we started to do it in Concord, we started to do it with juveniles. And literally within about 3 months, we had a case where there was 2 or 3 kids involved. So you've got it was 17 back then, so you got a 16-year-old and a couple of kids that just turned 17. So you say to the parents of the 16-year-old, we've got this wonderful program, and Vic wants to go forward, and this is wonderful. Oh no, I'll be glad to. And then the offenders, 17-year-old offenders, we say to them, sorry, 3 days ago we'd be able to take you into the program, but we can't now because you're no longer a juvenile. And we realize the ridiculousness of that. So in Concord, each chief is allowed to set parameters within their own department. But we threw those out the window a long time ago. We've had people in their 50s and 60s in the program. We don't stop a referral if the victim is angry or fearful. That's okay. That's what the process is for. That's what the people that run the circles are very good in dealing with. And this is one that the PD had a big time with. They're a frequent flyer. I had somebody come to the PD and say, to the officers, came to me and said, Chief, are you out of your mind to bring this guy in? Do you know how many times he's been down to court? And my answer to him was, and how's that working out for you? I have restitution issues. So what's in it for us? Not me, you're us. Police community interaction at levels that normal initiatives will rarely reach. You'll have police community initiatives throughout the cities and towns. They scratch the surface, they're talking to the choir most of the time, and you only get people who are willing to step forward. With this type of a program, you're going to be working with people that would never even look at you as you walk down the street. And the outcome is going to be, more often than not, a bond made between at least an offender and a police officer. One offender at a time, one family at a time, one officer at a time. That's how we move forward. It reduces labeling, like I told you earlier. There's higher satisfaction rates from all participants. We're up into the high 90s of everyone involved as far as their satisfaction rate, and much less recidivism. It reduces the prison pipeline for some offenders. It pulls them out of, you can get to them early, you pull them out of that. Is it a perfect marriage? No, it's not. It's a normal marriage. You need to work at it. There's lack of leadership, and it's mostly on the police side. Leaders change. Police officers police chiefs and administrators get involved in what they think is something that makes them look good or bad, rather than what's the correct thing to do. Safe starts leads to pigeonholing. In other words, well, it worked for this juvenile, so we're just going to stay with juveniles. Get turf battles with DA's offices. Get turf battles with other programs. RJ for other ends. We caught a couple of police departments that were using it to try to get get confessions out of people. But the organization cleaned up its own act, and it just makes us stronger. And fiscal constraints. And then there's trust. Trust is always going to be an issue. All it takes is one issue in a community to throw back so much work. So, I'm going to run through this quick. What are the ingredients for a successful program? Community interest. You have it. Law enforcement prosecutor interest. You're working on it. A community organization to support the initiative. And I'm not just saying this because I'm here, but this organization is phenomenal. You have an incredible foundation built here. That's the hard part. A lot of communities say, well, you got all these people want to do it, what do we do? Well, you got to build this. Oh, God, I can't do that. But you've got that. And you need bridge builders from the community and law enforcement. You need people that will say, regardless of the way I feel, this is important, and I will step over and I'll put my hand out to people that I want nothing to do with at this point, because this is bigger than all of us. You will find them in the community, you will find them in the PDs. Find them, get them together, let them build the bridge, and then others will walk across it. I guarantee it. And all you need is your first case. You've got people that are talented here. You've got an organization that's already set up. You could do a case tonight. Literally. All you need is a PD to bring forward a case and say, this is an issue, and you could do it tonight. You're years ahead of other organizations. This is going to take me too long. It's
Your show.
Yeah, it's your program. So earlier I said an argument to broaden the restorative justice base. If you look at this pyramid, crimes committed are at the bottom, obviously. We know that there's more crimes committed that are ever reported to the police, and then as you move up to charge, arrest, complaint, etc., up to the prison. As you move up, you decrease discretion, you decrease the community role, and you decrease the case numbers. You increase professionalization as you move up that chain. At the top of it are what we call RJ butterfly stories. These are the ones that are the ones that make all the news. They're the big cases, but they're usually at the top of the pyramid. My argument is RJ's capacity for growth is down towards the bottom of the pyramid, and that's where people come into the system. And if you build a program that involves the police, as hard as it may look to do, you will get people into this program prior to them getting sucked into that pipeline. I can do this really quickly. I'm just saying. So what is, I think it's important to say what collaborative RJ model isn't. It's not a replacement to the traditional criminal justice system. It's a complement to it. I'm not saying throw the other thing out. This is a complement. It's another tool in the toolbox. It's not a panacea, it's not an end-all, it's not an answer for everything that ails you. It fits in certain circumstances, however, the more you use it, the more it fits. It isn't at odds with diversion or mediation. It sits right alongside of them. The individual aspects of each situation will point the case in the right direction. There is plenty of work for everyone. Each discipline supports and strengthens the other when all available from the get-go. RJ isn't a strict set of rules. It is a compass heading. I stole that from someone. I think it was Howard. There are different paths to get there as long as you stay true to the RJ principles. When people and relationships are harmed, needs are created. The needs created by harms lead to obligations. The obligation is to heal and put right the harms. That is a just response.
So that's his call not from our area. So your call and your responsibility is how can I get involved in this movement? How can I change my community? We are not here just to spill out information. We are here to get you involved. This day is about you taking a step in a direction to change your community. That's your call. So now it's on you.
And I would end that with this. I don't know much about Western New York, but whatever your relationships with your PDs in this area, the worse they may be, the harder you need to fight for this program. That is one of the only things I've seen to pull the needle back up. It builds relationships.
today about, I'm sorry?
I'm sorry,
She said, what is your hidden skill? Oh, my hidden skill. Well, besides knowing how to milk a cow by hand, let's see another hidden skill. I know how to knit. And I can knit in a meeting and still track what people are doing. If it's not too hard, yeah. Brain development. I'm going to talk about brain development, historical trauma, and restorative practices. I don't think I'm going to get to the last two parts because that will just take a little bit too much time. But as we go through, I'm hoping to help you understand how, understanding how the brain works and what the effects of trauma are on people and how restorative practices helps to support people who have experienced those sorts of things. So let's start with the brain. First thing that I'd like you to just remember, and is that the memory of all of our experiences are stored in our body. It's not just in our head that we remember it, but it's physically, literally in our body, in our organs, in our muscles, etc. And how does that work? Well, we'll just go through a couple of basic issues, basic pieces of information about how the brain develops, how the brain operates in the body. So the way in which the brain develops is through that serve and return between the baby and the caregiver, between the child and the people in their family, the people in their neighborhood, between the student and the teachers that they have around them. The baby cries and the caregiver picks them up. And that tells the baby something about the world and how things operate. The brain also operates by developing from the back to the front in a scaffolding kind of way. So if part of the brain has been harmed, that's going to affect the other pieces coming forward, even if the harm stops. So it's just like with Tinker Toys. If you make a solid base, then everything above it is going to be solid. But if the bottom part is cattywampus, even though the things above it are solid and square, they're going to be cattywampus as well. So even if you stop maltreatment, for instance, from birth to 0, that's going to still have an effect on the other parts of the brain that develop later. And so the first part of the brain that develops is the amygdala and the hippocampus and the limbic system primarily, and the last part is the prefrontal cortex. So this development of the brain and how that works and how that connects to the rest of our body, it just helps to review the basic components of the central nervous system. You've got the brain, you've got the spinal cord going down the back with all these nerves coming out of those places, going to all of our organs and to all of the ends of our bodies. And the nervous system ends up with a single neuron at the end of the nerves, and it has these little dendrites. And those dendrites will reach out to each other when we do things. So if we're playing the piano, if we are shooting a basket, every time we shoot, the dendrites fire and they look for other dendrites that are firing, and they reach and they reach and they reach until they can touch, because we've done it over and over and over again. And if we continue to shoot that basketball into that hoop over and over and over again, pretty soon those dendrites that are touching will become wrapped with fat, a kind of insulation that will make the connection, the firing back and forth, enormously efficient. And so after a while, you don't have to think about picking up the basketball and going like this, because you just do it. Because you've done it so many times, you have the neural pathways for it. So our experiences build those neural pathways, and when we're born, we just have a few dendrites connected together, because we don't have to do a lot of things when we're born. We just have to eliminate waste and take in sustenance and, make sweet noises so that people will pick us up, right? But as we grow, we have more and more experiences, and we make this huge expanse of connections, which is a process called arborization, because it kind of looks like the way a great plant would operate. And so what's the biggest upload of information for a human being? And it happens usually between about 0 to 3. That happens in your entire life. Concentrated in one certain thing, language. Right, language. It's really incredible. And if you are in an environment where people speak English, you make neural pathways for English. And if you are lucky enough to be in an environment where you can learn more than one language, you will learn more than one language when you were a little kid. So a friend of mine was in the Philippines from about 0 to 5. By the time he was 5 years old, he could speak Tagalog, Spanish, and English just No matter who was talking to him, he could answer back and forth because that's what he heard, that's what people said to him, and he learned all of those structures. It's really kind of extraordinary. Of course, this is a rhetorical question. Does it make any sense if you were trying to teach somebody another language, say German or Swahili, and they are in class and they are not conjugating their verbs properly? Does it make any sense to suspend them from that class? No. Because how people learn language is by hearing it, practicing it, the serve and return with other people who are saying it, right? Well, the same thing is true with behavior. If you think that you're going to change behavior by suspending somebody out of school, you're on a fool's errand. That may get people's attention. It may secure the safety of the community. It may help the kid have a moment to calm down. But if you think that that suspension is going to change their behavior, it's not. That's not the way it works. The way behavior changes is in relationship with other people, practicing the things that you want to see happen. So we adapt to our environment, and just for the sake of, example, we'll talk about two extremely different kinds of environment. So if you're in a predictable, moderate stress kind of world, one that's symbolically a kind of playground, where the most stressful thing you can do is go to the top of the slide, and you get to choose whether or not you want to do that. And when you get to the bottom, there's someone there saying, "Was that okay? Did you like it? You want to do it again?" So in that kind of a situation, you're going to build parts of your brain, the part of your brain that deals with emotional processing is going to be very efficient. It's going to be very robust. It's going to have a lot of gray matter because there's going to be a lot of that fat wrapped around those neural pathways. You're going to be able to kick out the happy hormones very easily. You're going to be relationship oriented. You're going to put process over power. You're going to be laid back in your demeanor because you have the ability to do that. And under those circumstances, you can survive in this relationship-oriented world. But it will be difficult for you to operate in a continuous stress, unpredictable, kind of dangerous world because you won't have the neural pathways for that. But if you grow up in that kind of a world, then what will happen in your brain, generally speaking, is going to be that you're going to not have as large a production of the happy hormones, but you will be able to kick out those cortisol and adrenaline, those stress hormones really, really fast. And the emotional processing areas in your brain are going to be a bit smaller because you won't have had the time for that sort of thing. And because you're not sure that you can trust the adults around you, much less your environment, it's not going to be about relationship. It's going to be about impulsivity. It's going to be about making quick decisions. It's going to be about maybe being short-tempered. Or if the environment is so overwhelming for you, it may be that the way you respond will be by withdrawing or becoming depressed because it's just too much. So there's no judgment about these environments. They just are. It's not about good, bad, or indifferent. They just are. And we build neural pathways so we can survive in these kinds of environments. So the question is, if that experience gets wired into our biology, what do you do when you end up in a school, which is the third kind of environment, which asks for different behaviors from both of those other two environments as well. It's a little bit easier to go from the predictable, moderate stress world into the school because you're relationship oriented and you're kind of laid back. And it's easier for you to transfer, I trust my mom, okay, I'll trust the teacher. And then it is for somebody coming from the dangerous stress world where you just never are sure that you can trust anybody or anything. And so it doesn't matter if this is a quiet place. It's still not something that you would consider to be safe because you've never experienced that. So the first intervention in regards to making a school more trauma-informed is to help people, well, besides breathing and smiling at kids, is to switch the question that you have in your head about why kids do things that are not appropriate to the school. You know, it's not about what's wrong with that child that he can't walk quickly and quietly down to the library. This is a simple task. The question instead is, I wonder what happened to that child that they can't walk quickly and quietly down to the library. And it's not that you come up to a kid and say, what's wrong with you that you can't walk quickly and quietly down to the library? You don't do that in front of kids. That would be embarrassing to them. But you ask it in your own head. Because by thinking about it in your own head, that means that you then will be just a tad bit more compassionate toward this person, a little more curious, and anything that you say is going to be tinged with that curiosity. So, also another thing to consider and to think about is how we operate with stress. Now, human beings over the millennia have come up with a way of handling about 20 minutes of stress pretty efficiently, because that's probably how long it took us over the years to get away from the lions and the tigers and the bears. And if we didn't get away from the lions and the tigers and the bears, it didn't matter, right? So 20 minutes of stress hormone, we can handle that. Get cut off in traffic, 20 minutes later we can kind of calm down. So if you're a student and you come into a school, you have come into an environment that naturally has some stress in it. And stress can, under certain circumstances, be very helpful for learning, right? The stress of taking the test, you study for it, you take the test, and you remember what you took. The stress of having to do the presentation, it helps you to be able to remember what it is that you were talking about. But if you have a lot of stress in your life, before you come into school, the stress of taking the test can top the limit for you and send you over the edge. That can be very hard. So, let's talk also about the amygdala. So this, I think, is useful for people in schools working with students to understand, or for us to understand about ourselves. So our brain takes in information from our senses, right? That's where the stuff comes from. You hear things, you see things, you smell things, you touch things, you perceive things, and that all goes to the first place in the brain is the amygdala, which is part of the limbic system. It's connected to the hippocampus, right, which is the seat of memory. The amygdala, I like to say, I describe it as being something that works as a great big filter. And so the amygdala goes, ha, she's got a clicker, she's got a colorful scarf on, she's got a name tag, it's a conference, so that's a good thing. She's got a computer, she says she's from the Department of Education. She knows Dina, and I know Dina. She must be okay. So what I'm saying, you hear, goes to the amygdala, and the amygdala lets it go on to the prefrontal cortex, and we have conscious thought and learning. If for some reason I remind you of that third grade teacher who humiliated you in math class, well, we'll just talk about math because I'm a woman and I'm not that I'm accusing any third grade teachers of being mean to anybody. This was a long time ago. But I remind you of that person. I've got the same hair. I wave my hands around in the same way. I've got the same kind of voice. Got glasses on, just like that person. You might be triggered in the amygdala going, wait a minute, this is not safe. And you might be wondering whether or not you should do fight, flight, or freeze. Of course, the amygdala works with the hippocampus, and the hippocampus says, wait a minute, remember, she was really old when you were in third grade. She's probably dead now. This can't be the same person. And the amygdala is saying, are you sure? Yeah, I kind of think so. Oh my gosh. So the amygdala is trying to figure that out. And it's trying to decide whether or not it should do fight, flight, or freeze. Right? So you're not going to fight me because you know there's a former chief of police here at the conference. And you're not going to run out because that would be embarrassing. But you're probably not hearing anything that I'm saying because you're trying to sort out whether or not I'm that teacher. So there's no information going on to the prefrontal cortex and there's no conscious thought and learning. So the point about this in regards to trauma-informed practices is that kids come in and they may not know whether or not they can trust the people in the classroom. Can they trust the teacher? Can they trust the other kids in the classroom? Depending upon the environment that they come in, some kids would go, I don't care, they're different from me or same as me, doesn't matter. And then other kids would go, oh, I don't know, this is not really safe, I don't know. And the way that we make those decisions is with our sensory input, right? And our strongest sense is our sense of sight. And we have a desire to categorize. And the best categorization, people who do categorization that I know are middle school kids who can categorize things right down to shoelaces, right? They can make those distinctions. So we have to have some practices in school that help the students get more information than just what they see. And that's where having the circle process can be very helpful. You start the week or you start the class period with kids checking in about what did they do last night? What's their favorite video game? What's the best movie that they've seen recently? Any kind of odd thing. Do you have a pet? That sort of thing can help connect people together. And that's more information than what you're getting from your eyes. And so then after a while, people can feel as though, yeah, this is a safe environment. If you don't make safety, you will not have conscious thought and learning, even though the person is in the classroom. These people, they go down to the office. These people stop coming to school. But these people can sit in your classroom and not be learning. I taught speech. Second most scary thing for most people besides death, public speaking. On the day that kids were giving their speech, I thought it was a good idea to give them a little lecture beforehand as a means of calming them down and teaching them how the diaphragm and the vocal folds worked. I don't think anybody learned anything that day because they were frozen in place, terrified of the speech that they were going to be giving, and I was wasting my breath, right? So safety is really critical. This is from the Mind Up curriculum. I think it's really useful. And then the other thing to think about in being able to interpret how people act and also to understand how restorative justice works is the compass of shame and how we respond when we feel a sense of shame. So when we do something wrong, it's not uncommon for people to feel a sense of shame or embarrassment. When we have been hurt, it is not uncommon for people to feel embarrassed or ashamed. You know, you bullied me. You didn't bully everybody else. Why did you bully me? What's the deal with me? And the thing that's shame is defined in a simple way as being I'm bad. And guilt is about I did something bad, right? So if you're feeling this feeling of shame, you want to try to help people get that out. And it can be hard because it's such an uncomfortable feeling. And what we know about shame and how it relates to the question of using restorative practices is that the way people are able to dispel shame is by talking about it and being with people who care about you, who can help separate who you are from what you did. You are important, this behavior not so helpful. You are important, I'm sorry you got hurt, what do you need to make things better? You can separate the experience of the person who was hurt from who they are as a person as well. And that can only really be done in the relationship with other caring people. It's not enough for the principal or the social worker to be able to say that, although that's helpful. But if things have been really bad, you really need to have a group of people. You have to have friends, you have to have family members, you have to have maybe favorite teachers in order to be able to help people through that process of talking about what happened, how they felt when they did it, and then helping them figure out how they can replace their behavior or the experience of having hurt somebody with where they have repaired that harm. And if you don't help dispense shame, it can be like mold, and it can grow. And the next time you feel shame, it gets bigger. And the next time you feel shame, it gets bigger, and then it gets bigger. So it really behooves us to help people with helping move the shame out of your system, if you will. So what I'd like you to think about is how people express this. So some people, when they feel shame, it's withdrawal, right? Johnny, you stole the iPad, and the face just goes flat, blank, completely blank. And sometimes people interpret this as defiance. It's not defiance. They've gone blank because they can't think of anything because they're so embarrassed they've been shut off from their prefrontal cortex. Or there's avoidance. Johnny, you stole the iPad. Johnny gets up and runs out of the room. Well, that's a pretty clear example of a shame response. And again, the child is trying to protect their sense of self, and it's too uncomfortable to be in a place where people have said you've done something wrong. Johnny, you stole the iPad. Oh, I'm so stupid, I'm so stupid, I'm so stupid. And oftentimes this is probably more common among girls because they're socialized towards thinking there's something wrong with them sometimes. And you may see behaviors such as self-cutting or self-harm or chemical use as a means of medicating that feeling of shame and embarrassment. And then, of course, the classic, Johnny, you stole the iPad. Well, I wouldn't have stolen that iPad if you weren't such a stupid teacher and this wasn't such a stupid school. Okay, again, they're not attacking you, although it certainly feels like that, and they used all those pronouns you. But they're really trying to protect the sense of self. This is so embarrassing. Okay, anybody here afraid of mice? Because I'm going to show a picture of a mouse, and I just want to know if anybody's afraid of a mouse. Because one time I just threw up the mouse without trigger warning, and a woman almost jumped up and ran out of the room. Yeah. Lucky I had the clicker in my hand, and I was able to get rid of the mouse really quickly. And this is not a small thing, because some people are afraid of certain creatures. And if you throw up pictures for me of a snake, I would be like out of the room. I don't care if you could unclick that. Gone. Not coming back.
As long as it's not a rat.
It's not a rat, it's a mouse, and it's a brown mouse. Okay, you're good, okay. And spiders are tough for people as well. Yeah, so, and this is, this is in part of what I'm going to talk about, because it's about epigenetics, which is the changing of the marker in the genes that can be passed from one generation to the next. And the fear of those creatures is probably a very ancient fear from way, way, way back when that some people still have and manifest. And so that makes me feel like I'm not a weird person. So here we have our little mouse. Yeah, isn't it cute? So this is a story that illustrates epigenetics. There were some scientists who do the strange thing that scientists do. They put mice into steel cages that have steel bottoms, and they shock their little feet to make a startle response. Who does that on a regular basis? But anyway, in this case, the scientists wanted to see if they could make a response to apple blossom smell. So whenever they did the electrical shock that resulted in the startle response, they also kicked in some apple blossom smell into this little cage. And of course, pretty soon after a while, the mouse was getting a startle response to apple blossom smell without any electrical shock. These were all male mice who developed this startle response to apple blossom smells. They then mated with female mice, and the female mice had babies. And the babies also had the startle response to the apple blossom smell. No shock at all. And this response to apple blossom smell was passed on for 4 generations of mice. So that's an illustration, and it made me think when I first heard about adverse childhood experiences and trauma and all that sort of thing, and how that affects us in our body, of some ancient phrases. The sins of the father are visited upon the son of the 7th generation from the Bible, or from the Native American people, that we make decisions and think about how that will affect the 7th generation of children. So there was this somehow a kind of understanding that things can be passed on in general, and we now know that yes, absolutely they can be passed on in the genes. That people who experience famine, for instance, a man who has experienced extreme famine in his lifetime, his granddaughters may have difficulty with weight. They get a certain weight and it just stays because that's just what the body is going to do, because they're not going to go back to famine time again. And you can exercise till the cows come home and not have any cows to come home to, and it's not going to make any difference in your weight because the body is going to survive. So this is an interesting thing to consider when we're working with different people of different populations, because there is such a thing as historical trauma, and there's definitely a historical trauma related to school for lots of different kinds of people. So if we think about the boarding school era for American Indians here in the United States and Canada from the 1870s to the 1950s, there was policy of taking children away from their families, their grandparents who were their natural teachers, their culture, their language, their clothes, and put them in boarding schools. Now, it is not a normal thing for human beings to have a whole bunch of kids all together and expect that they're going to grow up and learn how to do things well as adults. Because the way that you learn how to do things well as adults is by seeing a lot of adults. And seeing them from the beginning until you become an adult yourself. So it had the impact that was spoken very much more eloquently about this morning than I can. But it's helpful to just stop and take a moment to think about and maybe empathize with what it was like for those children. So here we have a picture of a young man, Tom, who was a Carlisle School student before and after he was at the school. So just take a look at that face and tell me how old you think he was. Huh? Guesses?
18?
18? 14? He's a teenager, that's for sure. I would put him on the younger side, maybe 14 or 15 myself. And so when you're that age, clothes really mean a lot to you. How you wear your hair, and particularly in Native culture, you don't cut your hair unless someone dies. You know, that's close to you. So hair is powerful. So to go to a place where somebody has cut your hair like that, that must have been just a really bizarre thing. And to have your clothes taken away, and to have your earrings taken away, and to look in such a different way afterwards. As a teenager, just from a developmental standpoint, that would be hard. Not to layer on top of that, all the stuff having to do with culture that was taken away. It's like you've disappeared. So people who went to the boarding schools experienced really a lot of unspeakable cruelty. There was sexual abuse, there was physical abuse, people were not getting good nutrition. They were around death because a lot of kids died. If you got the cold or a flu, you didn't survive because you weren't getting a lot of good nutrition and it wasn't warm. There are lots of stories about that are really hard. And this, remember, lasted until about the 1950s. So there was a woman in one of my other sessions who said that this was an experience that her grandmother had had. She knew these stories. And then it also, the other thing to remember is that even though the boarding schools stopped, people stopped being taken away from the boarding schools, that the system, if you will, continued to take American Indian children away from their families through the foster care system. And sometimes they were taken away and put into foster care just so that white farmers would have basically an indentured servant. Yeah. Now, some people treated those kids well, but that wasn't necessarily a common thing. And so it wasn't until 1972 when the American Indian Child Welfare Act was passed that indicated that if a child was taken out of their home for whatever reason the state thought was important for their safety, they had to be placed in another Native American family. They could not be shipped out to some other group of people. So, how is this significant? Well, if we're thinking about people who don't want to come to parent-teacher meetings, it's probably not because they don't care about their child's education, but that to come to that parent-teacher meeting would require such an immense act of courage, they just don't have it at the end of the day. And this, of course, is not something that is solely about American Indian people. African Americans, the legacy around education with African Americans is not really very stellar in the United States either. In some instances, at different times in this country, if you learned how to read, you could endanger your life. And so it is not surprising that some people have a difficult time with the regular educational system. It's not that they don't want their children to learn. Everybody wants their children to learn because it ensures their survival. It's that they don't feel as though they can trust the system. So if any of you are in education now or are going to be in education, you need to remember that regardless of who you are and what your culture is, some people will see you just as school until you are able to step through and say, I'm Catherine, I'm Nancy, I'm George, and get to that personal level of relationship. And schools really need to rethink always expecting parents to come to their place, especially in light of the issues of historical trauma. When people don't want to come, maybe there's a reason. Again, I wonder what happened to them. So when we're thinking about having a restorative school and having a school that's trauma-informed, it's helpful to think in terms of any action that we do, any program that we take up, any training that we provide for our teachers and our aides and our lunchroom staff and our bus drivers, that one of the things that we try to impress upon everybody is that we need to use universal precautions for trauma, because there are going to be children in the classroom who have experienced trauma. And you can't tell by looking at them. They're just going to be there. We can do
the numbers around child sexual abuse for this audience go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's the number of people in this group, statistically, that have probably experienced child sexual abuse. So that's just one trauma, right? So people have experienced trauma. And what we need to do, therefore, is not find out who those kids are necessarily, but just always act as if they're there in your classroom. Just like you act all the time as if somebody is going to give you the flu, which means that you cough into your sleeve, you wash your hands, you wash your hands, you wash your hands. Not because you think that everybody's got the flu, but just in case, right? Just in case. So Gordon Hudus, in a monograph that he wrote for Pennsylvania, provided this recommendation that each adult working with any child or adolescent should provide unconditional respect to the child, being careful not to challenge him in ways that produce shame and humiliation. Because such an approach has no downside, as children who have been exposed to trauma require it, and other children deserve and can also benefit from this fundamentally humanistic approach. So that means that even if somebody has called you bad names, you have kind affect on your face, and you slow things down so that they can connect to their prefrontal cortex and not be triggered because you want an answer like that. And that would be a way of having a trauma-informed school. And of course, that's a natural thing that happens in the circle process. The talking piece goes around in order. It really slows down the conversation and allows people to connect to their prefrontal cortex. I want to thank you for coming to this wonderful day today. It's really been a pleasure being here in Buffalo and meeting all of you. You have a very strong infrastructure for restorative justice here, and I really can't wait to hear all of the good things that you will continue to do in the future. Thank you for your time.
So, how many people had a great time today? How many people learned something new today? How many people are ready to get involved in restorative practices? Oh, no. I really want to extend a heartfelt, huge thank you to Nancy and to Len, where's Len? And to Len for really lending their time, their talent, and their treasure today. Because I have to praise one of my girlfriends, my sisters, they left us with some juicy nuggets. And so I want us to take those juicy nuggets and I want us to use those juicy nuggets. Our city, it's a great city, and we are known as a city of good neighbors, but we are also known as the silo city. And so there are some things that we need to, some bridges that we need to build, and some walls that we need to tear down. Singly, tough. Together, very, very easy. So we are counting on you to be a part of this movement to make Buffalo, New York a circle city. And with that, I say thank you for attending our 3rd annual Restorative Justice Day, and I cannot wait to see you. I'm not even going to say next year. I can't wait to see you, I'm saying tomorrow, as you sign up to do something to affect our city. So thank you so much for being here today. Before we go, does anybody have any questions or reflections that you would like to share? I'm really tired of hearing my own voice. Any reflections that you would like to say or shout out about today? Yeah?
Did you work out?
There's some working out going. All this energy has got to go somewhere. So, girlfriends, we need a circle. Okay. Any other questions? Anything else? Yes, up here.
I like that African American dance.
Awesome. That was awesome. Yeah.
and this is amazing. And I have been participating in restorative justice trainings and some of the peace hubs, and you are familiar to me, and this is amazing. Thank you for that.
So I just really have to say, Kalina, she is working like a worker bee Kalina, yep, come in here. There is nothing that could have happened today without this woman right here. This event is free today because of this woman right here. And so I say thank you and I salute you myself right here. So this is it right here. Okay, thank you. Anyone, anything else? Yes.
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
Okay, so I want to say thank you again. Like I thank you in the class, but I want to thank you in front of everybody. You know, it's like I said, my school does this, but I'm gonna tell them that I came to an event today. So thank you again. Just thank you.
Okay, we talk about restorative justice. It's never one person. Restorative justice is all of us, right? So it's a heartfelt thank you. Anybody go to this workshop right here? How about here for the young people? Yes.
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone that made this success right here, especially Andrew for inviting me. I would love to be a part of this. I think this has been a part of a perfect day for me. And I say that specifically because I think any day that you can think, you can laugh, you can cry, that is to me a perfect day. I haven't cried yet. I've thought deeply about some things that are important to not only me, but obviously so many others, but I've also laughed. Thanks to Mr.
Weatherby.
Thank you very much. So at some point, hopefully I get a chance to cry.
Awesome. So getting involved, there are some brochures out there. I won't stress that enough. Grab one and get involved, and we have no age limit where we are. So come and get involved. Anything else? Yes.
Thank the volunteers.
Thank the volunteers. Awesome. Is a 99.9% volunteer organization. So awesome job for our volunteers. They get paid in love. Anything else? Any other comments? Awesome. Well, thanks again for being here. I can't wait to see you again very, very soon. Thank you.